Between the years 1883 and 1885, Ilya Yefimovich Repin unveiled this painting, depicting Ivan the Terrible embracing the dying body of his son. Legend goes it was Ivan himself who dealt the fatal blow. Part of the painting's long history of infamy and appraisal comes from how Ilya renders a paradoxical expression of grief on the face of the insane tyrant. As if immediately after wounding his boy, a rush of guilt overcame him, bringing him down to his knees, coiling into a position of regret. Guilt, after all, is a psychological force, and it shows how provocative that particular sensation can be to the eye of an artist. It invites a mental state of anguish over something we've done, something we know is wrong. And it doesn't stop at paintings. What you're listening to right now, for example, is All Apologies, a song belonging to Nirvana, more specifically to Kurt Cobain, the vocalist who, as most people know, faced several struggles in his personal life. It's not hard to hear the lyrics that Cobain wrote and not think that they carried some kind of repentance.
Everything is my fault.
Taking into account he dedicated the song to his wife and daughter, the weight and sorrow that the song bears isn't short of affecting. It brings up the question of how does one deal with the feeling of guilt? I would usually hide badly graded tests from my father when I was a young student. I was afraid the result of my poor performance would bring about harsh consequences, when in reality hiding them in the first place was the action that would later bite me in the ass. This led to a school life of compulsive lying, and every single time I did it, even if I got away with it, my conscience would feel guilt-ridden, because that awareness of having done wrong can upset us to our very core. So it's no surprise that guilt is found to be such an effective asset to storytelling.
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart.
The portrayal of a character disgraced by guilt draws the spectator in. It serves as a way of exploring introspection with an emotion we're all familiar with.
I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my child! I've abandoned my boy!
But what happens when we're in the position where guilt has metastasized like a disease to the point where it eats you up inside and threatens to turn you into a different kind of person? How do we deal with guilt when we've done something unforgivable? When confessing isn't enough? When repenting isn't enough? Is it possible to choose to reject the feeling of guilt?
Nigga, how old was he?
He was 26.
26.
This is the mental struggle that Chilean filmmaker Pablo Larraín lays bare on his 5 protagonists in his 2015 film El Club. The story follows fathers Vidal, Silva, Ortega, and Ramirez, priests who have been excommunicated by the church and are now bound to a tiny retirement home in a chilling coastal town. Here, the men are meant to serve penitence for their past actions. Now, the specific nature of this isn't particularly addressed for all of the characters, but it's clear that they were drastic enough for the church to essentially incarcerate them. That obscurity within the world of the cast, paired with the clever use of anamorphic Soviet-era lenses that give the low-light environment an austere, washed-out look, supports the idea that this location serves as purgatory.
Y en ese esfuerzo encontramos cosas como no iluminar, buscar circunstancias de luces que sean naturales, encuadrar de una manera determinada, usar estos lentes anamórficos antiguos, meterle filtros viejos y un poco como carretear un poco ese sensor tan prístino HD y darle como una pátina ya a la imagen.
However, is this truly punishment? I won't digress into whether it's fair or not, because it's implied that whatever got this man into purgatory in the first place ranges from homosexual tendencies to possibly child molestation, so that wouldn't be a just argument. And it isn't really what Larraín wants us to think about. Instead, he adds this extra element, Father Garcia, a visitor whose mission is to essentially close down the house and have the church deal with the priests in a different way.
Usted y yo sabemos por qué los hermanos están acá. Lo que yo necesito saber es si ellos están conscientes de por qué están acá. Esta casa no es un spa.
No.
Tampoco es una casa de retiro. Es un centro de oración y de penitencia.
Something our protagonists object to. Why? Because they find it comfortable there. They don't necessarily enjoy the location they're stuck in, but it's not like they don't have the free will to go out and enjoy activities like engaging in greyhound racing, placing bets, and even the pleasure of drinking. They have some restrictions, but it barely feels like they're being truly punished. In fact, very few appear to be struggling with guilt. And that is one of the motivating factors in Father Garcia's crusade. He holds these people to a very high standard and sees them as demoralized beings. So he wants them to get their deserved fate, because to Garcia, that is impartially the right thing to do. To him, without proper penitence, purgatory is pointless.
¿Ha pensado alguna vez que usted es un delincuente?
He's playing the part of judge, jury, and executioner. And as expected, our outcasts do whatever they can to deflect Garcia's means and procedures. They fight back when their liberties start being taken away.
A partir de ahora se prohíbe el consumo de alcohol en esta casa.
Más oración, menos paseo, más penitencia, menos perro, más verdura, menos pollo.
So if not this lifestyle of abstention, what exactly is the price these people have to pay for what they've done? What does Larraín, and by that extent his co-writers Guillermo Calderón and Daniel Villalobos, hint at? A filmmaker whose work largely focuses with human beings wrestling with the moral dilemma brought up by guilt is, ironically, Woody Allen. Yeah, no, I know, but more often than not, he will explore love affairs, adultery, and every now and then, Allen goes slightly darker and opts for a more somber theme. Let's see if you can spot it. In Crimes and Misdemeanors, the plot begins to unravel when one of the main characters has the desperate need to silence someone who is willing to spill the beans on their love affair, and the solution he succumbs to is murder. In Match Point, the main character, not unlike the one in Crimes and Misdemeanors, is faced with the hard choice of having to do something to a woman who threatens his stable livelihood, and that escape is murder. In Cassandra's Dream, two brothers get into large financial troubles and are tasked to do something unspeakable to pay their debt. Murder. In Irrational Man, a philosophy professor finds a cathartic relief in his troubled life, but yeah, you get the fucking point. Allen is obsessed with the extreme grief that murder can cause on a human being. However, the interesting aspect comes in when Allen makes the decision of what to do with these characters, how to wrap their arcs. I'm about to spoil the previous 4 movies I just mentioned, so just so you know, you've been warned. In Crimes and Misdemeanors and Match Point, the characters walk off scot-free without having to deal with punishment or any other form of consequence other than the ones they create for themselves. Whereas in Cassandra's Dream and Irrational Man, the characters are met with demise, and that demise is death. Okay, enough about Woody Allen, I don't want to talk about him anymore. Let's talk about Pablo Larraín. He seems like a cool guy. In his filmmaking toolbox, he'll go for a technical way of shooting a movie that adheres to the sense of mood and place he wants to create. In the case of No, for example, the film follows a few advertising craftsmen tasked with creating commercials for a campaign in favor of the referendum to end Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship in the late 80s. So, Pablo and his cinematographer Sergio Armstrong opted to shoot with era-appropriate video cameras. Not only is it intentionally stylistic, but it's expressive of the world Larraín wants to present to the audience. The team worked together again on El Club to a much different effect. Like I mentioned earlier, these lenses often distort the image, and at times it even keeps the subject slightly out of focus. One might look at it as a rookie mistake, but in general I think it reflects a realistic contrast with the nebulous state of mind these old men are constantly living in.
¿Cuál es su nombre de pila? ¿Me está escuchando? Padre Ramírez, ¿usted entiende lo que está pasando?
But like any exceptional storyteller, Larraín understands that his biggest assets are this group of actors the movie centers around. Alfredo Castro, for example, playing the caring greyhound dog breeder, always speaks with this soft mannerism. His voice is soothing, even when he is describing an atrocious deed.
Yo podría decir que le pedí a ese niño que durmiera conmigo en mi cama, que nos abrazamos, que rezamos, que dormimos cara a cara, que yo respiré su aliento, que él sabía que yo tenía el cerebro 2 veces más grande que él y que me usaba para sobrevivir, y que yo le presté mi sotana y le pinté los labios rojos.
There's also the magnificent Antonia Segers playing Sister Monica, whose task is to care for the house and the priests. There are subtleties to her performance that informs the viewer that perhaps she herself might not be exempt of a troubled past.
El actor tiene que instalarse en su personaje nomás, sin juicio, sin decir yo me instalo en su oscuridad ni en su luz, yo me instalo en su verdad.
Just by the way she calmly smiles, how methodical she is with the housework, and the dedication she has to these men whose lives she is now a part of. But the character who is by far the most alluring and adds the defining factor to the story being told is the aimless wanderer, Sandokan, because he is the one who confronts the priests with the ultimate agony they could possibly come across with, because Sandokan was a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of a priest. It is his appearance in the film early on, babbling and screaming, likely a result of a traumatic childhood, that makes this place turn from a calm retirement home to an actual living hell. It's the element of the victim being present that turns this club into a proper purgatory. It's one thing being remorseful for your past actions, having guilt eat you up inside, and it's a very different thing being confronted by those whom you've hurt. It creates a strain of mental chaos, but it also arises a new question as to why, oh why, is there always a correlation between holy figures and sexual abuse or assault?
Well, I'm a little uncomfortable.
There's been several movies touching on these themes of figures of sanctity blending in with the polar opposite of what those values should represent, as if they went hand in hand together.
There's been many things that has been happening around the idea of God. Many things that many people that suffer under the name of God. That would ever someday stop.
I mean, it has become so common, it's practically a joke at this point.
It was a big year for paedophile movies. Surviving R. Kelly, Leaving Neverland, Two Popes.
Like with Ivan's immediate regret following his fit of raging madness, it's a paradox. How could a figure that stands for the divine possibly be the perpetrator of such atrocities? How could a system whose purpose is to spread the word of love and acceptance choose to protect and hide the misguidedness of some of these terrible people?
Si te fijas en los sacerdotes, en los curas que han tenido problemas, como que han sido acusados por tantas razones, en ninguno de ellos se considera responsable de eso. Nadie dice yo fui o yo lo hice. Y el gallo que dice sí lo hice tiene una explicación moral para eso. En ese espacio la ambigüedad es tal que nadie es responsable de esto, nadie sabe muy bien qué hizo el otro ni por qué está ahí. Entonces hay como una extrañeza en donde tú puedes, en donde las personas, en donde ellos se ven muy frágiles también. Entonces como que hay como una compasión por esos personajes.
With El Club, Larraín provides a window into the suffering these people have when facing the victims of their past. Obviously, I don't mean the actual victims for each of their so-called cases, but rather the character of Sandokan who stands for the repercussions of what they've done. Storytelling, by its very nature, invites an audience to empathize with the protagonistic figures. But what if these are impossible to empathize with?
¿Qué pasa con un pueblo un pueblo en Chile donde hay 3 o 5 mil habitantes y hay un cura que hace algo que no debería, que para nosotros es un delito, para ellos es un pecado, y la iglesia, antes de que se transforme en un problema eso, lo toma y lo lleva a una casa de este tipo y lo reemplaza?
What should we have in store for men like this when confessing and repenting aren't enough? Sometimes, even when justice, law, and order isn't enough. Is being submitted to a constant state of affliction and mental self-flagellation the answer? Nietzsche, for example, sensed that guilt is a product of an inherent feeling of being indebted. After all, guilt in German doesn't fall far from debt. In fact, the philosopher argued that God and the effect it has on the mind of man brought about the greatest feeling of indebtedness on earth. Then again, Nietzsche also argued God is dead, so this view of his quickly shifted to the product of the decline in the consciousness of human debt. No God, no indebtedness, no guilt. Correct? Well, not quite so. The human brain is slightly more complex than that. We don't operate mechanically. A lot of us aren't even academic in our thoughts. We sometimes operate in ways we fail to understand. Perhaps there is a way of seeking redemption for what we've done, while still being held accountable. A path where the past mistakes we've committed don't result in some form of self-loathing. And this ending perhaps brings some form of absolution. But if those mistakes are truly unforgivable, and we have nothing left but to bear to live with them, and the pain we've caused to others, well, then how do we deal with that kind of guilt? I'm sure there are certainly some people who would rather not live with it, and instead they stand tall, with their head held high, rejecting guilt at all cost.